Welcome to Cyber Leaders with me, Ciaran Martin.
And me, James Lyne. Now, we're both from the SANS Institute who are kindly backing this podcast. I myself am a massive geek, a techie who spent my life chasing cyber criminals around the internet.
And I didn't. I dealt with cybersecurity policy and operations in government and set up the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. But together now, James and I are trying to unpack the weird, wacky, wired and wireless world of tech security and all the complicated things it involves.
And whilst not technical, Ciaran certainly caused plenty of pain to cyber criminals over the years. But anyway, this podcast is a voice for security leaders. We want CISOs, security directors, frankly, everyone beyond, to build up their knowledge of what works, what doesn't, and ultimately to secure their organizations more comprehensively and quickly. Well, Ciaran, I could pretty much guarantee we're going to mess up today.
It is your radiant optimism, James, that really motivates me and just gets me going. So what on earth is the problem now?
Well, you know how we keep recording kind of way too much content, getting into kind of in-depth, fascinating questions, ending up in recursion depth times 16 and panicking, losing total track of time, and frankly, keeping our lovely guests on for far too long, and then giving our amazing producer a simply impossible task unless using quantum computing and some spatial unfolding.
Yes, it's absolutely what we do. It's who we are. I cause pain not just to cyber criminals, but to you, producers, guests. I just like causing pain. It's our modus operandus, whatever.
But we should, or well, I say we shouldn't. I suppose we should at least try not to.
Well, at times like this, James, I think of the sage of Springfield, Mr. Homer Simpson. What's that line he says to Bart? You've tried your best and failed miserably. So the lesson is, don't even try. He's got a quote for everything.
I feel like there's some cybersecurity wisdom in there for several shiny new marketing products involving AI.
AI, don't even try.
We could put that one on a t-shirt. We've got another one already.
Another t-shirt, excellent. Anyway.
Well, look, Ciaran, I don't think today is the day to start.
Why would that be? Why should we not try today?
Well, Ciaran, because our guest today knows more about some of the issues of most interest to the cyber defense leadership community than, well, pretty much anyone else I can think of. Literally 2 doctorates across very different parts of our discipline, one the more technical side and the other on the psychological and human side, a fascinating blend.
Well, this is perfect. I mean, tell us more, because now that you've said this, I think we have all the time in the world if we're not going to try to keep the schedule.
We are going to try to keep the schedule, but...
No, okay, all right. We're going to try, but we're going to fail miserably. We've already agreed that. So tell us more about today's star guest. I mean, the name of the guest would be a start.
All right, I shall start failing valiantly on our timekeeping. So a bit of a build-up first. Today's guest, who we're really honoured to have, probably deserves the title of cyber leader, I would say. As well as these 2 doctorates, she pursues a stellar career as one of the most famous and venerable of all tech companies, IBM, where she's Senior Technical Staff Member, STSM, love a UFLA, fantastic acronym, and Senior Manager for Platform Development at IBM, where she also works across AI and email security. And that was after she moved in security, having done a decade in mainstream IT operations. Nothing painful, no battle scars from that at all, I'm sure. She's a professor, an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland Global Campus, and somehow in the past 3 years, amidst all of this, she's published 2 very well-received books on cyber security. Mind the Tech Gap, addressing the conflicts between IT and security teams. That was in 2022. And Effective Vulnerability Management, Managing Risk in the Vulnerable Digital Ecosystem, published in March 2024. She has not just 10 accreditations in cybersecurity and technology, but this is my favorite bit, Ciaran, 13 filed patents across IT and cybersecurity.
Wow.
Love a patent. She's a brilliant communicator, much sought after speaker, including by us at SANS. She's so many specialisms, it's hard to call them specialisms, a speciality if we're going to blend generality and specialism perhaps. Her expertise is both broad and deep, but if we had to pick 2, and I'm guessing on this, they'd probably be vulnerability management and the human factors in cybersecurity.
Okay, well, look, even by your standards, that was long. But in this case, it was justified, your loquacity. That was necessarily long, but it's already put us way over time. So, I mean, the one bit you forgot, the name of our guest, we're welcoming...
Yes, important detail. The amazing Dr. Nikki Robinson.
Hey, welcome, Nikki. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, look, I suppose the first thing I would say, is there anything that James missed out in that introduction? It's quite a resume.
Yeah, that was quite long. I think in the time since I had a chance to speak with you all last, I did get one more filed patent, but other than that, everything was great.
Excellent.
Nearly accurate. We should have asked AI. It would have hallucinated some more things for us, Ciaran.
Hallucinating patents, and AI don't even try. But look, Nikki, more seriously, we ask this of every guest in the podcast because there's so many different paths into cyber leadership, into successful careers in the profession. So how did you end up as a security expert? What's the story of your journey into cybersecurity?
Yeah, it was certainly circuitous. Circuitous? I think that's a word. We're going to use it.
We're all making up words today. Was specialism? I can't remember, but never mind.
Yeah, we'll add to the pile. So after about a decade, 10, 11 years in IT operations, I started to become a system owner, meaning that I owned the risk for all of the systems that I managed, which was becoming a large infrastructure. So the moment I got the stack of paperwork that said, you own this system, the enclave, the entire network, and now you own the risk, good luck. After I signed those papers, I thought, well, I should really get pretty smart about security. I own a lot of risk. So I started getting deep into vulnerability management, security assessments, network security, kind of across the gambit. But I also had an opportunity to get into digital forensics. I was asked a lot to help with investigations and pulling data from virtual desktops and infrastructure. So that got me really, really interested in the DFIR aspects of cybersecurity, but also the network defense side. So I thought, well, I'm going to take all of my IT knowledge, I'm going to bring it into security and see if I can help my friends in IT. And that was really what brought me into the security world.
Now, look, Nikki, it's very hard to know where to start because there are so many areas we could cover. But let's start with perhaps one of the broadest and most important areas you've explored in your work and in your first book. And that's this thing you call the tech gap. So tell us about the tech gap. For those of us who haven't read the book, and obviously you should go and do that, what do you mean by it? Why does it matter?
Yeah, the idea behind this book came when I made the switch from IT to cybersecurity, because I thought, I've got all this great IT knowledge. I'm having trouble with security teams. If I go to the security side, I can help my IT friends and everything's going to be easy, right? We're going to make this all work together. What happened was when I got to the security side, I found that all of the frustration, the challenges that I had on the IT side when it came to security were exactly the same, but in the opposite way on the security side. So all of the challenges that I was trying to patch systems, remediate vulnerabilities, improve our network security, lower the blast radius, right? Like really, really try to help make sure that if something happened, that the environment was protected. Really, what I learned was that both sides are feeling frustrated. Both sides are trying to do their absolute best to do their jobs. And that the tech gap that we see is not necessarily around our technical capabilities, but really around our missions, what we're trying to do. So in IT, our job is to keep our systems functioning for our users. Getting a call from an unhappy user is never great. So I always want to make sure my systems are operating, that they've got every capability that they need. And on the security side, my job is to protect those systems that are running, to make sure that my users are protected. I want to make sure that the systems that they're using are easy to use, but also secure, especially when they're trying to do lots of different types of work, development work, whether it's product development or building applications or just, users, right? HR, administration. So what I found that gap really came down to was the way that we look at technology, the way that we operate technology, and that we try to protect it. Where we have some commonality in the availability of systems, we all care if our systems are available, but security is really saying, hey, I want those systems available and secure. And the IT team is saying, I need them available and operational for my users. And that's really where the gap comes in. And that's really what I tried to address in the book.
I love how you describe the gap. And you're right, sometimes it's dissonance of mission. There's this kind of Venn diagram where it overlaps, but there's difference. I don't know if you found the same thing, Nikki. Sometimes, even where the mission overlaps and there's a shared goal, just the language that's used by the two teams to describe what they're trying to accomplish creates issues, even when they're after the same end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, in my second PhD, I studied the way that we use language when it comes to vulnerability chaining and how we actually communicate with each other, because what I found was very much the same thing. When I'm talking about risk on the security side, I'm saying there's a risk to our systems, either maybe through data loss, system compromise, right? That's the risk I'm talking about. When I was on the IT side, risk meant risk to our systems operating. We might have downtime. There might be impact to our users. And so just that one kind of umbrella term risk means something very different to both sides of the technical community.
So this is going to resonate hugely with people listening to this podcast, cyber leaders and so forth, apart from the two PhDs, but that probably won't resonate with an awful lot of them and not your two co-hosts. However, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the playbook you've written about how to address this tech gap. So I thought you brought out really, really vividly, there's this assumption that everybody's going to be speaking the same language. They're not, that people are really going to understand each other's needs. They're not. So take it from there. It's a positive book. It's got recommendations. What do you do about this in a well-run organization?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things I would start with. One of them is bringing IT and security to the table in a very neutral location, right? And not when something's on fire, not when there's an incident, not when something is broken or you have a 0 day. Bring the teams together.
Pizza Hut, always a good venue.
Pizza Hut, Starbucks, coffee, anything, right? Like bring the teams together for an opportunity to get to know each other, talk to each other about what's frustrating them. Because I find that they're going to find common ground like, oh, you're frustrated too? Oh, I'm frustrated. Here's what's working and here's what's not. And then I think once you bring the teams together in a more neutral location, then you can start to dig into where our problems are. I think one of the common things that I see when teams are not getting along or they're getting frustrated is kind of for two big buckets of reasons. One is that security says, fix everything right now. Do it, get it done. But they don't always offer, and I say this as a security person, they don't always offer a solution. Patch the systems, get it done in 30 days, but they don't say how. So I think bringing your security members to the table and say, don't just throw this problem at them, help them solve it, right? Help them understand if we can't remediate, if we can't fix this patch right now, what can we do about it? What can we do about it in the short term to get us to the long-term goal, to get rid of legacy software or, whatever is kind of plaguing the team? That's kind of the first bucket is figure out what we can do as far as mitigation versus remediation. And then the other bucket on the IT side is that security isn't the enemy. They're not trying to be the enemy. They really care about the users. They care about the systems. But we use a lot of very harsh language that comes across that way, threats, risks, attack vectors, all these things that come across as very harsh language. But it's really in a way to help sort of show where the systems are vulnerable and how we want to protect them from those things. So I think changing the conversation a little bit, even just to get going, will help you identify where those real problems exist. And then you can build a path for actually fixing them.
That very much resonates. I mean, ages ago, my own experience in government, the relationship between the IT people who were being quite revolutionary at the time and the security people was terrible. And one of the things that improved it was when the security people, we started to actually use some language and show some behaviours that said, we'd actually quite like you to succeed in delivering decent IT to the government. And that changed a lot. But there was a question then, and it came up in the same experience. It's a question about timing. And I don't mean the timing of the opening hours of Pizza Hut. I mean, just generally, we always say the right time for this conversation is right at the start.
There's a 24-hour one somewhere, Ciaran. Got to be.
But there's always time for Pizza Hut and security and IT teams, whatever. But what I mean by this, Nikki, is that one of the mistakes I've made in countless briefings to boards and senior leaders and IT teams and so on, I said, get security in from the start and build it in and have the conversation then. And they go, well, that would have been great 5 years ago, but you talk about a tech gap. We've got too much tech debt. It's too late for this conversation. You must hear that all the time. Can you give me a better answer than one I currently have? Because my current one's rubbish. What do you say when you have this conversation, but they've already said, look, we've done our big IT upgrade already 3 years ago. We're not going to do one for another few years. What do we do in between?
Yeah, I think that conversation does change from fix it all now, fix all the vulnerabilities, to how do we make network segmentation work for us to make sure that the systems are protected until we can get to a place where we do that. The other piece of that conversation is how did we get here? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again in 3 years? I don't want to just solve today's problem. I want to make sure that we're thinking about 3 years down the road. So that means evaluating what we have today. What mitigating things can we put in place? If it's network security, I find that that's very successful, at least to make sure that if something happens, when something happens, you're not getting to everything, right? They can get a little bit of data, but they're not going to get everything, right? That's kind of what I want to focus on is limiting impact. The second piece of that is, okay, it took 5 years for us to get here. Where do we want to be in 5 years? That includes budget. That includes what legacy systems do we have now, but what's going to go EOL, end of life, in 3 years? I want to start preparing for that now. And I tell people to have that conversation early. Software and hardware, they have a relatively stable life cycle. We know if you know that you're using certain types of products, you know that in a couple of years, they're going to go EOL. So what's our path to make sure we don't ever hit that again? So I think those conversations have to happen in tandem, knowing that we don't want to get to the same place in 5 years and keep fighting fires. But I think the short-term plan is mitigate. We know that in vulnerability management, the story for a long time was fix everything. You have to fix everything. That doesn't work. There are way too many vulnerabilities. Environments are way too complex. So the conversation has to change to what can we fix today? What can we fix? And then how do we protect the systems that we can't fix? And some of that's identity and access management too, right? We can look into other areas of cybersecurity to protect our systems until we can get to a better place.
So, you're in cybersecurity. Maybe you're an active CISO or a different type of cybersecurity leader, but you're looking to connect with peers to help navigate the challenges of your demanding and dynamic role. Well, the SANS CISO Network, a private community exclusively for practicing CISOs and cybersecurity leaders, could be just the place for you. You can collaborate in confidence, gain access to cutting-edge research and resources, and world-class events. So if you're ready to take your cybersecurity leadership to the next level, register to become a member of the network today by visiting sans.org/CISO-network. That's sans.org/CISO-network.
I love that. It's funny. I remember, much earlier in my career having these discussions where we talk about these kind of 5-year technology plans and big digital transformations. And now we're much more in the art of, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. Something insane with quantum or AI. And I'm talking to a lot of folks across security and IT who seem to be spending much of their time thinking about the architecture and process that is most able to cope with the unknown versus trying to build more and more rigid plans. And I actually think that's some version of right. I don't think that's a cop-out. I think that probably is how one has to tackle the world now. But curious if you think that's a bit of a cop-out and we're just being lazy and we ought to build, more long-term strategy around the stuff and plan more rigidly, or just got a plan to adapt.
I think it is a good point, right? The ability to adapt, the ability to build infrastructure that can adapt. To me, it's the same conversations that we were having a couple of years ago around resiliency. Why am I building systems that have to stay up 24/7? You can't reboot a Windows server. That seems bad to me. I want to be able to have systems, containers, infrastructure that can go up and down at a whim and not impact production. So I think it's the same conversation around resiliency as it is stability. I want to build systems that are stable regardless of patching and upgrades and 0 days. Pick your network device. This is my favorite conversation I have around network devices. They all have RCEs every couple of months. Expect any network device to have an RCE every couple of months, meaning that either you're going to have to rebuild. Maybe you can't even use your same configuration, even if you've saved it, right? You might have to rebuild those systems or purchase new ones. We've seen that before too, right? If they're compromised. So having a plan that says, it's okay if we lose these systems, it's okay if we lose the software because it's not going to impact my production environment. Resiliency and stability, you can kind of build for regardless of the technology stack that you're using.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And certainly the psychology one should employ. You scratched the back of my brain in 2 ways there. You gave me 2 fond memories I shall mention, and then we'll get back to some real work and move on to book 2 and area 2. I do remember successfully connecting a Mac OS 9 system to the internet for about 3 years and leaving it relatively wide open, and no one managed to compromise it that I know. I presume because it was like trying to network with a breeze block in terms of its capabilities. And also once finding a FreeBSD server in a server room with a sticky on it that said, do not reboot. I checked the uptime and it had been there for 8 years.
That checks out.
I'm like, oh, all right. I think we've all seen a few of them. I'm just surprised it wasn't under someone's desk, frankly. But, talking of difficult problems, you don't really tend to shy away from those, Nikki, in our field. So let's move on to vulnerability management. We looked at your work, your second book called Effective Vulnerability Management. Now, wanted to start by asking you about the subtitle. It says managing risk in the vulnerable digital ecosystem. And Ciaran and I suspect you didn't choose those words about the vulnerable digital ecosystem by accident. So perhaps you could expand a bit on what you meant by it. Or it just sounded cool and we can move on to another question. That's fine too.
I think it was kind of both, right? It does sound cool, but it definitely serves a purpose, which is, we find ourselves, any practitioner, whether you're on the IT side or the security side, or you're a developer, we find ourselves in a place where AI is touching all of the things, which means that we have a lot more data. We have larger infrastructure. So we have larger cloud accounts. There are a lot of different environments that are still using on-prem and cloud environments for lots of different reasons. Or you have multi-cloud. Maybe you're using AWS and Azure for any number of reasons. And so when we're talking about the vulnerable digital ecosystem, what that means is, especially if you're in a large development environment, you're going to have any number of tools, libraries, software applications, websites. You're going to have an entire organization that's running with development, plus the infrastructure, plus the networking, plus the identity and access management, plus the sheer volume of vulnerabilities that are released every day. I think the last time I checked, it was roughly 55 vulnerabilities are released every day, but that was 2024 numbers. So I'm sure that number is higher this year. So if you consider all of the different types of technology that you're using and add to that complexity, if you're using, let's say RHEL, you're using Red Hat, you might have 8, 9, and 10. You might have environments where you're managing multiple different layers of OS, multiple different versions of applications, and you may be stuck on certain versions of, I don't know, hypothetically Java for any number of reasons.
Oh, you said a dirty word. Oh.
I did, I know. There's going to be a lot of people cringing.
We're not done with that yet.
And then you've got all these other dependencies on all of your libraries. So the word ecosystem, meaning that there are a large number of vulnerabilities across a lot of different types of technology, and they all stack on each other. So everywhere that you're looking to patch, to upgrade, to install new systems, all of that comes with vulnerabilities. So you sort of make the assumption that whatever you're putting in place is going to be vulnerable until you make sure that it's not. And some of that is known risk, some of that's unknown risk. So when we're saying vulnerable, there's probably a lot of unknown risk. Like I was mentioning, network devices is a really good example. It's an unknown risk in that maybe the RCE wasn't released today, but it might be next week. Anyway, so that was sort of where the idea came from for the title, but also the reason why, we wanted to write the book initially to account for a lot of modern vulnerability management stacks, which are far more complex, than they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago when you were just managing a couple of server racks in your data center.
So I just wanted to ask you about that because your work has got all sorts, and your answer, all sorts of really good ideas about how to manage this problem. But I wanted to ask you a bit about the problem itself. And so in the course of the last bit of the discussion, you mentioned libraries, then you mentioned Java. So inevitably you think of Log4j and all of that. And you think of all these, every so often we have these dreadful outbreaks of just mass crisis vulnerabilities. And then we've got 55 a day or whatever it is now. Given you know so much about this, do you ever hold out any hope for some sort of strategic improvement at above the organizational level, just at the ecosystem level, that's just going to make this a lot easier? Or are we just going to have to deal with this forever?
I do think there's hope. I am also a very positive person. I like to think that there's always hope.
Excellent.
But I think there's a couple of reasons to be hopeful. I do think there are more infrastructure engineers, architects, developers that are seeing a more simple approach to infrastructure and development, which can, one, reduce risk, reduce the number of vulnerabilities, but it also reduces the amount of reliance or manual overhead or patching or all of these other activities that come with managing complex environments. We're starting to sort of see that happen now. So I think people are starting to get the idea that maybe reducing our tool stack will actually help make this easier for us. I will also say the other hopeful thing, I know there's a lot to say about AI, but I'll focus on what I think it can actually help us with, which is helping with identification of vulnerabilities, but not just that. What do we fix first? Based on the environment, based on what we're seeing, based on my risk profile. If I'm a healthcare institution, I'm not as worried about the same types of things that a financial institution is going to be worried about. My threat modeling is going to be very different. So I think that there are a lot more AI capabilities that we can use to help us figure out what risk makes the most sense to us, give us context that we need for our environment, especially if you're using something in-house that you actually have context around, maybe your data lake or your data warehouse that you can actually build an LLM capability with to help give you a better picture of that. So I do think there's hope in both of those avenues. I think we're still a couple of years away from that, but I think we're going to get there.
I agree. I think there's a lot of capabilities you mentioned there that can make a big difference. I'm going to admit, maybe I was a little naive and over-optimistic. I think about 15 years ago in my career, I was like, this stuff's going to get a lot easier. We're not going to be talking about it anymore. It's going to commoditize. It's going to go away. And listening to you articulate the sheer surface area of the different pieces of technology and the interoperation of them, you almost end up in some version of the whole thing problem chasing it, right? I just didn't process that until later in my career. And that's why I suppose maybe vulnerability management and similar isn't particularly sexy here in 2025. But it's still a pretty significant issue. But look, Nikki, enough strategy. Ciaran's trying to go all policy and strategy, which he likes to do. But let's get down in the weeds a little bit and be a bit geeky.
I'm not done yet, but you go.
Oh, okay. He's going to bring us back up afterwards. Well, Ciaran, let us know when we kind of hit maximum recursion depth. So let's assume the ecosystem doesn't improve and people have to fix their own vulnerabilities. How's that going to work? I mean, that sounds like duct tape and string type stuff trying to mitigate it. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, it was part of why we wanted to write the book too, was that we know a lot of people in the industry, our friends that work at different companies that are feeling that way, right? They're frustrated. They've got a pile of vulnerabilities, maybe 10,000, 100,000, who knows, right? That they're just sort of feeling underwater. The idea is that you can pick a place to start. This whole idea of decision paralysis, right? You get to a place where you think, I can't make a decision because I've got too much to do. The best thing to do is to pick the biggest area that you're going to make the most impact. I give this example. It's not always applicable to people, but let's consider an environment where you've got 4,000 Windows servers and they're all missing 3 months worth of patches. That's a pretty easy one to fix, even if you're in production environments, because if you have dev tests...
Deploy Linux. Problem solved.
Exactly. You just get rid of Windows. You can do that too. But you can get to a place of automated patching that you don't ever have to think about this again. There's a place that you can get to do this, so you can remediate quickly and then automate very quickly. And you can do the same with Linux, right? With Ansible, there's a bunch of different ways that you can automate patching. So you automate the things that are the most complicated or the things that take the most manual amount of time. And then you can focus on the really complex stuff. Anything that requires major system upgrades or major downtime or building environments in parallel, those types of things, then you can sort of take those. But until you sort of tackle the things that are most impactful, the most amount of systems that you're going to positively reduce risk for, then you're going to end up kind of getting stuck in this mountain of vulnerabilities and not quite sure where to go.
So following on from that, tell us a little bit about vulnerability chaining, an area I must admit, having spent some time in kind of exploit development, I'm more familiar with. But for our audience, what is it? Why does it matter? How's it done? And how do you deal with it? Probably a new term for a lot of folks.
Yeah. So I discovered this term, and it's part of the reason why I got my DSC in cybersecurity, because I discovered vulnerability chaining in the CVSS, I think it was the 2.0 guide, which is the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So there's a user guide, and they had a small paragraph about vulnerability chaining saying how, as an analyst, if you're submitting a vulnerability to the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, how you would calculate and score a chained vulnerability.
I'm just taking a moment to be staggered that someone actually read the manual.
Oh, yeah. That was me.
And now you may continue with your point.
Yes, I've read all of the CVSS guide manuals. What I found was that there's actually 2 categories of vulnerability chaining that weren't accounted for in the guide. So the one that the guide is talking about is if a product, let's take, for example, Active Directory VMware, they'll submit 2 vulnerabilities, 2 CVE IDs at the same time that if they're chained together could have serious impact. So that's one product, 2 vulnerabilities. The other aspect of vulnerability chaining is if there are multiple avenues into systems to either elevate privileges or create a full system compromise. So you would essentially chain together multiple vulnerabilities. And in most cases, they're lower categorized vulnerabilities. So a lower and medium that you could actually chain together to create a more critical attack. And that's the best way I can describe it. A lot of people don't think about it from the network defender side because people see vulnerabilities as singular items. And people, when they're doing remediation, tend to focus on the criticals and highs, maybe because of their policies or regulations they have to follow. But it's actually the lower and medium scored vulnerabilities, which can actually be chained together to create the most critical types of attacks. And they're the most difficult to spot. They're very, very difficult to identify without some sort of, documentation or a way to find them in your environment.
It can be catastrophic. And you're right, it can be difficult to map. I once tried an analogy involving multiple slices of Swiss cheese with holes in and trying to line them up. It did not land, so I won't recreate it. Ciaran, help me out here.
Well, I was just going to say, until you started banging on about Swiss cheese, I actually understood that, even though vulnerability chaining was a new term for me. Absolutely fascinating. And it does allow me to pivot, not so much to policy, but to people, your other area of expertise, because you did explain that in a really accessible way, even though it's very, very complicated. So let's turn to your other book and another area of your expertise, which is people in cybersecurity and what we can expect from people and how we best use people in cyber defense. So help me out again with my board level and other talks. So I go around and I talk to people, and every so often after some presentation where it's got nothing to do with this, somebody comes up and says, yes, and I got scammed, etc. And people are the weakest link and everybody in my organization is a disaster and so forth. And I go, hang on, it's a bit more complicated than that. And then I start to flannel and fluster. I did it at a school this very morning. So you must all the time get somebody piping up at the end of some dazzling expose of cyber risk and say, yes, but people are the weakest link. You know all about it. What do you say in that situation?
Well, usually my question is, do we build technology that's secure and helps our users, right? I don't expect my users to be cybersecurity experts. I don't expect them to know what vulnerability chaining is. I don't expect them to know, why we implement security controls necessarily, right? They have a job to do. They might be doing something else. I expect them to have a baseline understanding, but what I find is that a lot of times we build security policies and tooling into their everyday workflow that makes their lives more difficult, which means that they're going to look for a way to go around that complicated workflow to do something insecure to make their jobs easier. So my question always back is, but did we make the security processes, did we make the tools secure and easy for them to use? Or did we make it more difficult, making their lives more difficult, making them choose the insecure route?
Yeah. Hey, so I suppose, seeing as Ciaran and I are playing strategy, policy, technical tennis today, or pickleball or racquetball or squash or something else.
I even mentioned Log4j. What more do you want? I'm playing on your patch today.
It's pretty good, Ciaran. We'll be switching roles soon, except I definitely can't do your bit.
Steady on. No.
Look, in your work on this side of things, it's related to what you were talking about, these frictions of users and how they behave. You use this intriguing phrase of cognitive load and cognitive overload. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, honestly, this was really what got me interested in human factors engineering as a discipline and how it really can positively impact what we do in cybersecurity. So human factors engineering is really the blend of engineering, design, and psychology. My favorite early on example is, how do you build a hammer? There are hammers that are made for lots of different uses, right? You might be using it to put a nail in the wall, to hang a poster. You might be using it for, concrete or something. I don't know a lot about hammers, but I assume that they are used for lots of different reasons because they look different. They're made of different materials. You hold them differently. But so when it comes to cognitive load, or the load, our memory, how much load we have on what we're doing every day. If you think about tools as the amount of websites that we interact with, the amount of communication applications that we use, the amount of different tasks that we keep in our brain at any one time, how many different projects we're working on, whether that's professionally or personally, right? The amount of information we have to keep in our brain at one time, that's what we call cognitive load. So when you need to make decisions, especially in cybersecurity, we have to make decisions very quickly with a lot of information. There could be a lot going on that we need to try to figure out, okay, do we contain a system? Do we isolate it? Who do we contact? What do we do? So there's a lot of decisions we have to make very quickly. A good example is a SOC analyst. They're constantly looking at different dashboards, alerts, notifications, network devices, vulnerabilities, all kinds of different things that they're triaging and looking at, to then make a decision on whether they think this is a true positive or a false positive, or maybe something that requires more investigation. So the ability to understand how much we're constantly processing in our brains at any one time is really, really important, especially when you talk about stress and burnout and people getting frustrated and, wanting to leave the profession or wanting to leave their job, because it's so much information all the time that it can make it feel like a lot of stress and pressure when we're taking in that much information.
Now, we could go on forever, even by our standards, on this topic. There's so much more in your work about the human factors. But is there anything else you want to tell us about the human factors in cybersecurity, about, where people might find out more or bring this all together?
Yeah, I actually, some very exciting news. It was just announced, but me and my co-author, Calvin Nobles, we're writing a book called Human Factors in Cybersecurity. It's going to be out in March 2026 with our publisher, Pact.
Book number 3.
Yes, book number 3. I'm very excited about this one because it really, I feel like, brings together everything that, I've seen in the industry, everything I've learned. And Calvin, he is an expert in this area. He has so much research around security fatigue and everything across cognition. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope people will enjoy it.
Well, congratulations in advance. This is tremendous. It'll be a real boost to the cyber security community, to the cyber leaders community. I think it's the first time we've ever had breaking news on this podcast, James. So it's another first for us.
I agree. And it's a prime number of books as well. So that's great.
Well, that's the most James thing I've ever heard. It also, from our point of view, given our sometimes occasional laziness, it means that we have to get this podcast released before March 2026, because then it's not even breaking news anymore. But congratulations, and thanks for saving us from going on even longer than we normally do by saying, don't worry, I've literally written a book on this if you want to find out more. So can't wait for that, and good luck for March 2026.
Implied follow-up.
Exactly. Now, one thing before we start to go, because we are running spectacularly over time, even if you have shortened it. This is so useful, we make no apologies for it. Let's ask you a general one, given how much experience you've got, how much expertise you've got about trends in the industry. So we said we need to come to AI, how the adversaries and defenders use it. Are we winning? Are we losing? You talked a little bit about burnout, stress, diversity, the lack thereof. There's constant sort of narrative about skills shortages. So how do you see the industry right now? You described yourself as an optimist, but are there any particular things you're optimistic or pessimistic about?
Yes, the list is long, but I will keep it short.
You'll be doing better than us.
I'll give you one of each. How about that? I'll start with pessimistic and then I'll give you an optimistic one. I think what I'm a little pessimistic about, or what I see that needs some improvement, we're not quite there yet. We're in the middle of the AI boom, right? There's so much changing. There's MCP architecture. There's A2A, agent to agent. There's new tooling being released all the time, and everyone is using AI in some capacity or thinks we must use AI in some capacity. I challenge that a little bit. Is it really? Do we need AI for this? Did we not leverage automation when we could have? My job is to think about, could we simplify this and make this a little bit easier? So I think that's one of the areas, but anytime there's new technology like this, I kind of expect it to happen, right?
Yeah.
I think the pendulum is swinging. I think it's going to slowly come back. I think we're starting to see some of that. And where I'm optimistic is the amount of capability we have available to us to really solve tangible problems. I think we're right there, right? We're very close. I don't think we're going to solve everything in 2025, but I think by 2026, as the pendulum starts to swing back a little bit into what makes the most sense, us choosing what makes the most sense, I think we're going to really see a ton of tangible improvement, especially in the vulnerability management space, but also in the cybersecurity space at large. I think we're going to see capability really, really helping our cyber professionals and our users at large.
I'm really aligned to both of those responses, and particularly on AI. There's been so much buzz and hype. And of course, it's an amazing set of technologies, incredible potential, but it has to be like anything deployed selectively after the most valuable use cases. It goes back to your hammer analogy before. And I think people are learning on that relatively rapidly, and hopefully more progress will be made by the time this podcast releases. I also agree with you on the volume of stuff we have to make a difference in cybersecurity. In fact, one of the bigger challenges to getting to your optimistic outlook, I think, is there's so much of it. Having enough people to actually make use of it is part of the problem for many security leaders. So we're just going to have to keep being ruthless on what we prioritize, the things that matter, and being cautious not to get overexcited about buzz that promises the world, because we've seen that movie quite a few times already in our 15, 20 years tenure here in combination. So love those, and great to have someone optimistic about the future. But look, Nikki, we've covered so much, but I am afraid we are going to have to start to bring things to a close.
We have covered so much. Thank you for generating some optimism, but also for all you do to make yourself part of the solution. We are bringing things to a close, but James, we cannot forget.
Exactly. My favorite bit. Look, as you know, it's only fair if we ask people to listen to us that we give them something useful at the end, something concise and salient and pithy, actionable.
Indeed. And despite the fact you've peppered your answers with useful, actionable advice throughout this recording, Nikki, we are still going to ask you for
your 30-second takeaway. So, Nikki, ultimately, this podcast is about lessons for cybersecurity leaders. So if you've got 30 seconds with a cybersecurity leader, what would you advise them? Something to pay attention to, something to ignore, or, Homer Simpson, don't even try. Time to change to another industry. Up to you. 30-second takeaway.
Okay, great. All right, get the clock started. So I would say that the biggest advice that I could give anyone in cybersecurity, especially for cyber leaders, is craft a really good problem statement. There's never going to be one solution that fits everything, but I find a lot of times that people think they know the answer, or they think that technology is going to solve it, or like we were talking about, AI is going to solve it. Really hone your problem statement. What challenges are you actually facing? Is it actually the technology? Is it that it's not being used in the right way? Is it that your teams need to be upskilled? Is it that, you have a legacy environment that you need to get rid of? But focus on building a really great problem statement and then try to solve it. Don't just try to solve something thinking that you know what the answer might be. I think that's probably the best advice that I could give to any cyber leader.
And excellent advice it is. Thank you so much.
Absolutely fantastic. It's superb to have you always. I mean, clearly we'll have to have a follow-up session. We've covered but a fraction of your expertise, and we haven't even really got into the third book yet. Have to get a pre-release, Ciaran.
Yeah, so that is all we have time for in this episode. But you can, of course, read The Tech Gap, read Effective Vulnerability Management, and from March 2026, you can read about the human factors in cybersecurity. All that remains for us to do is thank you for listening and ask for some feedback.
Oh, yes. Feedback, please. Always important, right?
Indeed. So you can leave us feedback at the podcast site, or you can email us at cyberleaderspodcast@sans.org. Tell us what you'd like to hear more of, less of, anything you like.
Well, within reason. But anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, and keep cybering. So from me, Ciaran Martin.
And from me, James Line.
It's goodbye.
And semicolon Q exclamation mark.